What is up, guys? It's Bobgar, and it's $10 deck time again. This week, we're looking at a 10-ticket modern Mono Green Stompy list. So before I started my own channel, I did videos for a channel called Magic Gathering Strat, and I played this deck a lot. I didn't play a budget version of it. I mostly played a slightly more built-up version of it, but I played it a lot and posted lots of videos of it on there. I wanted to do a deck this week that didn't take too much prep for me, because I only have one day free, so I'm trying to nail this out pretty quick. And then also one that fulfills a request, and the request that it fulfills is more Mono Green Stompy on the channel, since that's one of the things that people know me for and enjoy the content that I do for. So this is a budget version of Mono Green Stompy. Not super worse than the normal version, but it does lose a few things that I usually put in. And it's a pretty straightforward deck. We'll start with the 1-drops. For Experiment 1, this is our strongest 1-drop, just gets bigger over the course of the game. A lot of people don't remember that it has Regenerate by removing 2 counters either, and that actually makes it really powerful and sticky against a lot of control decks. It can survive sweepers, it can survive single target removal without having to hold up things to counteract that removal. Just overall a very strong card, safer to play some of your buffs and enchantments on because it has a Regenerate too. And then 3 Dryad Militant. It's just a 2/1 most of the time, but there are a lot of decks out there that use instants and sorceries from the graveyard, and as long as this is in play, those instants and sorceries go directly to exile after if they would go to the graveyard. So this helps a lot against any deck that's running things like Snapcaster. Also, a lot of decks that are running Delve, this slows down by quite a bit. Just overall, a very good card in certain matchups that are actually pretty common and that the deck can have a little bit of trouble with. So I find it to be very good to have as a 3 of. Just we want to be aggressive. We need a 1-drop that hoses some of what our opponent is doing, so it's good for that. Then we're running 2 Kessig Prowler. This guy's a little newer. He's a 2/1 that you can pay 5 mana into to make him a 4/4 that can only be blocked by at most 1 creature. And so mostly he's just a 2/1. You just play 2 of him because he has an upside in the late game. And we usually don't need, obviously we don't need more than 1 Dryad Militant out at a time. After the first one, they might as well be Kessig Prowlers to give us advantage in the late game. So that's why I have the split there. So 9 total 1-drops. Pretty likely we'll have a 1-drop creature play. We are an aggressive deck. We want to, if we can, we want to basically always start with Experiment 1. That's not always going to be possible. That's kind of our goal. And then the 2-drops. Strangleroot Geist is on the left. He's probably our strongest 2-drop and most likely to play turn 2 and just most reliable. He's a 2/1 haste for 2 that also has Undying. And Undying is super important. It means the first time he would try to go to the graveyard from play, he comes back in with a +1/+1 counter. So he comes back in as a 3/2, again with haste. This means he survives a lot of the removal in the format. Not all. Path to Exile does get him, but Fatal Push and Lightning Bolt both don't really do that much to him because he just comes right back in even bigger. It also is nice that he has haste, so he can pump out damage pretty quickly. And yeah, just a very good card overall. It's also the +1/+1 counters are nice because of our synergy we're going to see in a second. We're also running 4 Kalonian Tusker. This is probably the weakest creature in the whole deck. He's the one that you really a priced up version might run a couple Scavenging Ooze in his place. I usually run 2 in a priced up version, but he's the one that there's not really a good card to replace with in Modern. That's a 2-drop that's super good, and that I kind of am hoping someday they will print a better card to slip in at the 2-drop here. But for now, he's reasonably good as a 2-mana 3/3. It's just a super efficient, super big threat. Not much to say there since that's all he does. And then finally, Avatar of the Resolute. I put him at the end mostly because he's not usually a turn 2 play. You can play him turn 2. Sometimes you have to, especially if you're just running light on threats. You'd much rather play him turn 3 after you have at least 1 counter on your Experiment 1 and after your Strangleroot Geist has died, because he has Reach and Trample, and he's a 3/2, which is already really good for 2 mana. And he gets a +1/+1 counter on it when it enters the battlefield for each other creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it. So if you have a Experiment 1 with a +1/+1 counter on it and a Strangleroot Geist with a +1/+1 counter on it, this guy becomes a 2-mana 5/4 Reach Trample. So the upside on this guy is super high. He can just blow people out if you get good draws. So that's why he's in there. And he's also just good. He's just like, as a vanilla, he's probably better than Tusker just because of the built-in Reach and Trample. And then the secondary ability happens to synergize really well with our deck already. It also happens when he enters the battlefield. So not only does he get the +1/+1 counter on him from things like Experiment 1, when he enters play with those on him, because he's entering as that, he will trigger Experiment 1 as if he were a 4/3 or a 5/5 or whatever. So super cool card, super good in the deck. And then the 3-drops. This slide is a little simpler. 4 great big Leatherback Baloths. They are 4/5s for 3. One of the most efficient creatures ever printed in Magic. It can be outpaced by a Tarmogoyf at 2, but you have to do a lot of work to make a Tarmogoyf big, and this guy is big all on his own. So he's kind of the top end for the deck. 3 is where the deck caps out. We only run 4 3-drops, and this is it. So we're going to be a little land light too. You'll see later. But yeah, he's just super good. And the fact that he has 3 green pips up there is important to the deck too, as we'll see in a little bit. But yeah, super good card. And then we get into the way we win. So one thing you might notice is that the deck has some weaknesses in being a creature deck. It can be a little slow, and it can have trouble swinging past people. We want to make sure that our little creatures continue to trade up in the mid and late game, and we also want to make sure that when they get blocked, they can do damage through our opponent. So first we have Rancor. It's an enchantment. It gives our creature +2/+0 and trample. So the trample is super nice. It means we can strap this on a Leatherback and swing and be almost guaranteed to do some damage, because there just aren't very many creatures in Modern that can block a 5/6 trample profitably. And if you manage to stick it to your creature, which in this deck is pretty easy, if it is put in the graveyard from play, either by getting hit with enchantment removal or by the creature that you put it on dying, it will come back to your hand. This does not work if they kill your creature in response to casting it, but as long as you get it onto your creature, if they kill it or your creature, this will come back to hand and you can reuse it, which makes Rancor just a super, super strong enchantment. It's crazy that they printed this thing at common back in the day. This sees play in Pauper and things like that. Anyway, but it's just a really good spell. Vines of the Vastwood is one of my favorite spells ever printed. It is a instant for 1 mana, but you're usually going to want to play it for 2. It does depend. It has a lot of flexibility. It says target creature can't be the target of spells or abilities your opponent controls this turn. If Vines of Vastwood was kicked, that creature gets +4/+4 until end of turn. So it is a 2 mana +4/+4 in a lot of instances, but it also keeps your opponent from, removing your threat. A lot of times you'll just want to use it as in response to your opponent trying to lightning ball your creature, especially if you're attacking your opponent tries to lightning ball or fatal push or path to exile your creature, and you have enough mana to kick it. You can just kick this and say, not only do I fizzle your spell, I also give my guy a huge bonus. Giving these kind of pluses, like I said, are really important for the deck so that you can swing through your opponents, because they might have a few blockers down and you want to make sure your creatures are bigger. And then there's some other really cool tricks with this. So you can actually cast this on your opponent's creatures in response to things like enchantments or activated abilities. One of the tricks used to be when Splinter Twin was in the format, when they tried to cast Splinter Twin on their creature, you could actually cast this on the creature they were trying to cast Splinter Twin on, and Splinter Twin would fizzle because their creature couldn't be targeted by spells that your opponent controls. So it's not quite hexproof. It's actually better than hexproof because you can keep your opponent from doing things to their own creatures. So yeah, that's pretty cool. And then 3 Aspect of the Hydra. We run less of this one just because it has the highest upside of any of these, but it also can just get stuck in hand if you're playing against a removal heavy deck or a control deck, and mid-range or control usually, and you just have 0 threats or very few threats. This card becomes terrible. It's important against aggro matchups and things like that to race aggro and combo. This is what helps you win on turn 3 or 4. It is target creature gets +X/+X until end of turn, where X is your devotion to green. And that's the number of little permanents you have on the field with green forest symbols in their upper right-hand corner. If you've noticed, every single permanent that we have in the deck so far has a full set of those. The 3-drops have 3, the 2-drops have 2, the 1-drops have 1. So this will often just be +6/+6 or even +8/+8 if you get really lucky. Like I said, it does get worse if your opponents are running a lot of removals. You'll see if we run into removal-heavy matchups, I tend to sideboard them out. And that's also the reason I only run 3, is even though they have upside, and if you're racing against another aggro deck, you probably want these in because they just won't have that much removal. They'll just be playing down their own creatures and burn. But if you're playing against other decks, you really do kind of want to go down on these a little bit, just so that you are a little bit more threat dense, because without the permanents on the field, this becomes really bad. But it's a super sweet card, and it gives the deck a lot of punch. It lets it win out of nowhere when your opponent's not expecting it. Like, you can just be like, oh yeah, the board's kind of gummed up. Well, I have 1 Rancor on, 2-1 or something, but I have, you know, 6 pips worth of devotion on the board, swing with my 4/1 because it has a Rancor on it, and then, you know, give it +6/+6, and suddenly I'm swinging for 10 and my opponent didn't block right and I just kill him. Maybe I have a Vines up to give it hexproof or whatever. So those are the buffs. They make combat really tricky and they help us push through damage in, like I said, kind of the mid game when our little weenie creatures start to peter out. And then we have removal. So that's one of the big problems for especially the budget version of this deck, is really all we get is Prey Upon. We're running 3 of them. This makes your creature fight another creature, which is your creature deals damage to that creature equal to its power, and that creature deals damage to your creature equal to its power. First strike doesn't matter. They just do damage to each other. I mean, it's good in this deck because we have a bunch of big threats, and a lot of times we can pump and then fight and get our opponents, but it's also just, it's not instant speed, and it requires us having creatures out, which sometimes we don't. I think most priced up versions run Dismember, just even though Dismember costs a little bit of life, in general, it's just going to be better. It's going to kill almost everything that Prey Upon would for us anyway, and it'll do it at instant speed. It costs us 4 life, but it's just not that big a deal. Okay, so that was removal, and then lands. So 18, we're running 21 lands total, 18 basic forest, and then 3 Treetop Village. Treetop Village do slow the deck down, and that does suck for us a lot, but the bottom line is having a creature that's a land that we can play for free, it takes up a land slot, and that survives sweepers, just is super useful. And, you know, 2 mana to activate to make a 3/3 with Trample is actually pretty powerful in Modern, so I usually am pleasantly surprised by how well Treetop Village performs, even though it does slow us down occasionally, which, I mean, it might lose us some games too, but overall I think it wins us more games than it loses, so that's why it's in the deck, and it's pretty cheap, at least on Magic Online. I think in paper it's not super expensive either, but it is a little bit more. But yeah, super sweet card. And that's the whole deck. We're going to move on to the sideboard now. This is the biggest sideboard slide I've ever made. It took a little bit of work, took a little doing, because I had to, besides the card images like super small and they're kind of stuck together at the bottom, that's why it almost looks like their corners are cut off, because the little white overlapping thing. So I'll just start going over them. Tormod's Crypt to deal with graveyard decks. We're running 2. 1 Gut Shot, mostly to deal with decks that are running Mana Dorks, although we could cite it in against other things like Infect, which is not super common now. 1 Mistcutter, this is one of these like one-ofs that's good in certain matchups. Comes in against mostly control decks, but just blue decks in general. Goes through a counter spell since it can't be countered. You can make it pretty big late game and just swing for 8 or 9. I mean, hopefully not that much. I'm just saying, like, the upside is very high. Like, if you have half your lands out, you can make a giant Hydra. And the fact that it has protection from blue means things like Snapcaster Mage can't just chump it. Natural State, 3 of them against Artifact and Enchantment decks. It's just, you need some Artifact and Enchantment hate. That's an easy one. Back to Nature is pretty much just in for the Bogles matchup. Destroy all enchantments. I mean, other enchantments decks too, there just aren't that many out there. You do run into the odd Enduring Ideal deck and things like that, which obviously is also very good against, but the bottom line is it's pretty good for us. We do run 1 enchantment in Rancor, but if we destroy Rancor, it just comes right back to our hand and we can recast it anyway. So as a one-of, there's very little downside and a lot of potential upside. So we run 1 of that. 2 Feed the Clan against hyper aggro decks where we need to gain a lot of life. Naya Zoo, Naya Burn, things like that. You gain 5 life and it has Ferocious. You gain 10 if you control a creature with power 4 or greater. We'll often be able to play this for Ferocious, but against Burn, even just playing it as gain 5 life is pretty good. Skylasher is a little bit like Mistcutter Hydra. It's basically against blue decks. This one's a little better against things that run Delver and things like that. It has Flash and it can't be countered. Reach, protection from blue, 2/2. So 2 mana, 2/2, it's alright. Reach makes it a little better, protection from blue makes it a little better, and Flash makes it a little better. And the can't be countered is actually probably the most important part of it, but not super exciting. 1 Unravel the Aether, more Artifact and Enchantment hate. This one lets you shuffle the Artifact or Enchantment into their library. Not super important. It does a much better job against, well, let me start again. It hits Wormcoil Engine. Natural State doesn't actually hit it. I'm used to running ones that hit Wormcoil Engine but just destroy. But this actually not only hits Wormcoil Engine, it shovels Wormcoil Engine back in so they don't even get the tokens from it. So it's quite good against that. 1 Needle Storm. I'm not sure if this one's worth it or not. I had it in there and I decided to keep it. Deal 4 damage to each creature with flying. None of our creatures have flying. We have nothing in our sideboard with flying. It feels good as a 3 mana wipe, but it's also not super relevant. There just aren't that many flying based decks in Modern. But obviously against fairies or something, maybe against white-black tokens, probably a worthwhile include. But it's hard for me to imagine too many matchups where it's useful. So possible I should have put in something else. I don't know. Troll Ascetic I actually like a lot. It's a super cheap card, but it's super sticky. Can't be the target of spells or abilities your opponent controls, so it has hexproof before they came up with the word hexproof. A colorless and a green, regenerate it. And it's just a 3-mana 3/2. Can't see the little power and toughness there, unfortunately, because the way I cut the slide, that's my fault. But trust me, it's a 3/2. And a 3-mana 3/2 is not great, but the fact that it has hexproof and regenerate just makes it a super sticky threat against control decks. Or mid-range decks too, because a lot of the mid-range decks have a lot of removal. Obviously, can't regenerate against Liliana downtick, but against most other things, you can survive. And having something to strap the Rancor to that can't be the target at all is super nice. So that's what he's in there for. Then one Creeping Corrosion against the super heavy artifact decks like Lantern Control and Affinity and eggs and things like that. Just all of those. Destroy all artifacts. So, I mean, against certain decks, especially Affinity, this is just a huge wipe that can win you the game if you draw it. Again, it's just a 1-of, so the chances of drawing it are pretty slim, but if you draw it, it's pretty good. And let's move on. That was a lot of time on the sideboard, and maybe I'll try to cut that down somehow. Now let's move on to the actual full deck list. $10 on Magic Line, slightly under 40 in paper. So this is actually a super cheap deck to make in paper. I have a version of it in paper. It's slightly more expensive than that just because I have a few extra things like collected companies in the sideboard that make it slightly more expensive, but really a very cheap deck. And it's very powerful. You'll win a lot of games. I brought it to a Friday Night Magic once and I went 3-2. Hopefully I can do that well in the league we're about to play. I have my doubts. If I had to put money on it, I would say 2-3. I think it can win enough matchups that 2-3 is pretty reasonable. 3-2 might be a little bit of a stretch, but yeah, this is the deck. This is what it looks like. Leatherback Baloth kind of headlining it there. And that's pretty much the deck. Let's take a look at the matchups real quick. So we'll start with Burn. I think that's one of the only positive matchups. We can often outrace them. It feels pretty good. I think we have a slight advantage against Zoo also, just because 4/5 Leatherback Baloth is bigger than the Wild Nacatl and a lot of the other things the Zoo is bringing to the table. But they do tend to be a little bit faster than us and have a little bit more burn, so they might just be able to squeak it out before we can stabilize. But we're just like slightly more towards mid-range than them, and I think we're still fast enough to stabilize against them and get them. Sweepers hurt us a lot, so we have a pretty weak control matchup. We just really can't deal with a Supreme Verdict very well. We're not the worst Zoo deck. I mean, they hurt all Zoo decks. We're slightly better than a lot of Zoo decks against it, just because we do have Strangleroot Geist, which comes back after it's killed, and we do have Experiment 1, which you can take 2 counters off of to regenerate. And then post-board, we get some things to help us get through those. But main board, we don't have a lot that deals well with sweepers, so control decks are pretty tricky. Combo and big mana, we just have to try to race against. Sometimes we'll beat them, especially if Tron stumbles and doesn't get it till turn 4 and we happen to be on the play. We will win turn 4 very often. We won't win turn 3 very often though, and if they hit turn 3 Tron, we will probably lose that game. Not necessarily, but it's quite likely. Same with combo. A lot of combo goes off turn 3 or 4. If they're a little bit slow, we could easily get them, especially if they don't have a lot of removal or other things to keep us at bay. But more often than not, they will beat us. So probably a slightly bad matchup. Not as bad as Controlled Ball, but not great. Mid-range can often just grind us out. It's a little unfortunate. I mean, the bottom line is things like Liliana and single target removal do hurt us pretty badly, even though we do have a few sticky threats. And they make our aspects feel really bad. Like, thing is, we do have a bunch of sticky threats, but we're not that threat dense because we have so many pumps. And if they manage to kill all of our creatures before we can really utilize those pumps just become dead spells. So a lot of like Jund style decks, I think, give us a lot of trouble. More creaturey mid-range, we actually have a relatively good chance of board stalling and then just pumping through, but those are the less common ones these days. I see a lot more Liliana style, super heavy removal, maybe a few counter spells, kind of push into mid-range and try to lock your opponent out style decks. And I think those are pretty good against us. So those are the matchup. That's the deck for the week. I'm going to jump into a league and play some games and I guess wish me luck. Every time I jump into a league, I'm a little scared. Hopefully I don't go 0-5. I feel like 2-3 in a league is about 3-2 in the practice lobby. All right, Thank you guys for watching. I'll see you next time.
Hey guys, Bobgar here. I just really wanted to quickly say, if you enjoyed the video, please give it a like. If you enjoy my content in general and would like to see more of it, subscribe. I'll be coming out with more content in the future. And please leave me comments and let me know what I'm doing right, what I'm doing wrong, both in terms of production and in terms of my play and my deck building and all that. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I will see you guys next time.